In this documentary, we'll explore daily life in two coastal villages on the west coast of Norway, one of which has a population of just 53 inhabitants. We'll take you on a tour of a typical Norwegian apartment, and we'll also examine phenomena such as the northern lights, sun pillars and the midnight sun. Finally, we'll take a dive into Norway's outdoors culture and its fishing and farming industries. But before we begin, how did I, a Londoner, end up staying on the coast of Norway for 3 years? The story begins in 2016. This is me back then, a time when I was full of confidence and didn't need to suck in my gut for selfies. I'm on Tinder, furiously swiping right on any woman who appears to have most of her teeth when I come across a profile 1,300 kilometers away. An Indian in Norway? Interesting. I'm not sure about the green hair color, but I swipe right because she appears to have an impressive tooth-to-gum ratio. Seriously, I put that in my profile. We match, and I charm her with a dazzling display of wit and humor. She's like, "Oh my god, you're so cool and British and sophisticated," not knowing that within weeks, I'd have no reservations about taking a shit in front of her while she brushed her teeth. We organise a date in London, which goes fantastically well, but we've got a problem. I live in London, a global city with a population of 9 million and I dare say, the capital of Europe. While she lives in a Norwegian coastal village 450 kilometers south of the bloody Arctic Circle. Now, as a man, I had to ask myself some tough questions. Just how far am I willing to travel for coitus? What I learned about myself is that I am in fact able to travel a remarkable distance for coitus. So thanks to the blessed EU and both of us being self-employed, we began a relationship. One where I would spend 2 consecutive weekends in Norway, we would spend the next weekend apart, and then she would come to London for the next 2 weekends. So just how remote could this village be? Door to door, the journey went something like this. I'd walk 7 minutes to the bus stop, take a 20-minute bus to the airport, check in, take a 2-hour flight from Heathrow to Oslo, lay over for 2 to 6 hours, take a 45-minute flight from Oslo to Ålesund, take a 1-hour bus ride from the airport to a local shopping centre, wait for 30 to 90 minutes, take another 1-hour bus ride from the shopping centre to the village, and finally summon the will to walk the last 15 minutes to her place. Without further ado, welcome to Bratwurg. If you're thinking it sounds like something from an IKEA catalogue, you'd be right, it actually is. If you're in Norway, you might have seen it featured on the news in January 2021 when 38 teenagers had a house party that was broken up by the police. Bratwurg is a coastal industrial village that lives in the shadow of Hellandshornet, a dramatic mountain 882 meters high. Bratwurg has a population of 2,448 in an area covering 1.74 square kilometers. It was first settled on November 11, 1911 by
Anna og Iver Shelton.
And unbelievably, that house still stands in its original location, although I'm not too sure about the colour. Norway's history actually begins on the west coast. As the last ice age ended, hunter-gatherers migrated along the coastline, living off the land and hunting for fish, seals and reindeer. Fast forward until the Industrial Revolution and the local economy consists of farming, fishing, timber, mining and textiles. Then, of course, came the discovery of petroleum in the 60s, which completely transformed the region. Today, the maritime industry is represented in Bratwurg with a ferry port, shipyard, a Rolls-Royce factory and Bratwurg Electro, who have to be the only maritime electrical company to have their own theme song publicly available on YouTube. It's utterly insane, I'll leave a link in the description. Let's take a walk from the flat to the village centre. Now, you might think of villages as being backwards with poor infrastructure, but you'd be wrong. Bratwurg has good transport links, fast broadband, and several services you'd expect to find in a city, albeit on a smaller scale. As we approach the village centre, there's a Rema 1000 supermarket, a car rental company called Good Car, and a 650 capacity church, built in 1977 and presumably designed by the architect of the Death Star. West Norway is overwhelmingly Christian. In fact, the West Coast and South Coast joined to form Norway's Bible Belt, but without the casual racism. The church used to have an ominous green light at night, but these days it's a more inviting warm floodlight. In the centre you'll find everything from luxury apartments to an abandoned house, 3 schools, a local newspaper, a shopping mall with a Vinmonopolet and a co-op supermarket inside.
And they're building this new parking area and this new area of the mall. This is the old part.
The local government has an office, along with a police station with apartments on top of it. For entertainment, there's a trend towards multi-purpose venues. This place is a bar, burger restaurant and a bowling alley. So it's 10 o'clock on Friday night at the local 6-lane bowling alley. The local theatre is also a cinema with a capacity of 91. It usually shows 1 or 2 movies on Wednesdays and Sundays. If you don't feel like cooking, you have the choice of a local cafe, Thai restaurant and a pizza and kebab restaurant. I was shocked to learn that, like 95% of the electricity produced in Norway, Bratwurg is powered by hydroelectricity. Just like the UK, Norway's healthcare doesn't cover dental treatments, although we have fixed prices for common procedures. Here's a comparison of what you might pay.
Welcome to the office. The clinic looks way cooler now than it did for a month ago. It was all white and boring. Now it's cool. Brain walls! This is the lab room. This is our lunch area. So old. Oh no, they kept it here. The technician gave me this bag. Put the crumbs in there to work. Actually, he gave this lingerie bag.
This is how to just snack.
Don't look at me.
If you've ever wondered whether Scandinavian homes look like IKEA showrooms, well, you'd be right. Like many other homes, Biku's apartment had large windows, white walls, wooden floors, a minimalist interior and an absolutely breathtaking coastal view. Her two-bedroom apartment was a spacious 100 square meters and cost approximately £700 per month excluding bills, which works out to about £7 per square meter. On the edge of Greater London, a two-bedroom 75 square metre flat would be about £1,300 or £17.33 per square metre, rising to £2,700 or £36 per square metre in Kensington and Chelsea. One area where Norway truly excels in is promoting a good work-life balance. Biku's schedule looked like this. Meanwhile, when I used to work in an office in central London, it looked like this. The shorter working hours and brief commute contribute to having almost double the amount of precious free time. This is probably the single most important reason why Norwegians are so happy. We could cook healthy meals from scratch instead of shoving something in the oven for 20 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. We could binge watch a show, play lengthy co-op campaign games, and take the time to fully explore our hobbies. It's difficult to find climate data for Bratwurg, so we use the neighbouring city, Ålesund, for comparison. Although you might associate Norway with sub-zero temperatures, the Gulf Stream warms the coastline by about 5 degrees Celsius, which is significant for a city that lies on the same latitude as Alaska and the Yukon. Now, being British, you could say I'm somewhat used to unpredictable weather and perpetually overcast days. However, the weather in Norway was temperamental. With an average high of 16 degrees Celsius in August, it never quite reaches comfortable t-shirt and shorts weather compared to London's 23 degrees Celsius. The Gulf Stream's warming effect is more obvious in winter though, with only a 1 degree difference in temperature from London. British weather is synonymous with rain. There's even a song called Rainy Day in London by obscure Canadian rock band Boulevard. It comes as no surprise that London receives 106 days of rainfall a year, but I was startled to find out Ålesund receives an astounding 269 days of rainfall every year, over 2.5 times as much. I couldn't find exact figures for snowfall, but I did shoot some footage when it did snow. The snow completely transformed the village into a winter wonderland. The wind was also unpredictable. You could experience anything from a gentle breeze to this within a matter of minutes. Even when we were out shooting for this documentary, we were hit by a hailstorm. The wind was punishing, painfully whipping the stones into our faces. Next, the sun. You can expect 1,180 hours of sunshine in Ålesund versus 1,481 in London. There's a large difference in daylight hours over the course of the year. On the summer solstice, Ålesund will have 20 hours of daylight versus over 16.5 in London. Whereas on the winter solstice, Ålesund will have just under 5 hours of daylight versus almost 8 in London. Bratwurg's latitude and geography means you'll experience a range of meteorological phenomena you won't get in London. It's not quite in the Arctic Circle, so you won't get to experience the midnight sun, but instead you'll get something arguably better: midnight twilight. It's 10:40 at the moment, and this is just scenery. The sun's still out. This is crazy. The sun dips below the horizon, but the sky, instead of going dark, becomes bathed in a vivid warm glow until the sun rises again. It's incredibly beautiful but equally disorienting, so the locals have blackout blinds so they can maintain dark conditions in their bedrooms. You can also see the infamous northern lights in Bratwurg. They weren't intense enough for real-time video, but I was able to capture them with a long exposure photo. If you're lucky, you might come across a sun pillar. It's a somewhat rare phenomenon where suspended ice crystals reflect light from the sun, forming a bright pillar of light that looks like it belongs in a fantasy movie. Coined by the Norwegian playwright
Henrik Ibsen, friluftsliv,
is often translated as open-air living. In practice, it means disconnecting from the stresses of society, taking part in regular outdoor activities and connecting with nature. Friluftsliv is perfectly encapsulated in a Norwegian saying,
Det finnes ikke dårlig vær, bare dårlige klær.
which translates to there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. In kindergarten, children spend 70% of the time outdoors in summer and 30% outdoors in winter. When they're a bit older, they learn the
Fjellvettreglene.
or Norwegian mountain code. It's similar to our countryside code but accounts for the harsher conditions present in Norway. In Norway, it's completely normal for children to walk to and from school alone, climb trees on school property without being told off, and to go on annual ski trips with their classmates. Biko explained that her school would organise trips to the woods every fortnight. That's 2 freedom weeks for my American viewers. There they would learn to take part in activities such as orienteering, learning how to start a fire and cooking food that they brought from home.
Time to do some barbecue.
One popular snack was
Pinnebrød.
or stick bread. After preparing the dough at home, children would locate branches in the woods, sharpen the ends into skewers, wrap the dough around the branch, and then bake it over a fire. What are your favourite memories of outdoorsy school trips? Let me know in the comments. Friluftsliv education doesn't stop in childhood though. You can take a bachelor's and even master's in it. In adult life, according to The Guardian, the average Norwegian visits the great outdoors 3 times a week. And according to Visit Norway, it's not uncommon for Norwegians to go hiking or cycling on a first date. Friluftsliv is enshrined in law as
Allemannsretten.
or every man's right, which allows public access to all non-cultivated land. It means you can wild camp in any place you like for one night, as long as you are at least 150 meters away from an inhabited house or cabin. You can also swim in most waters, forage in the forests, and fish for saltwater species without a license, as long as it's for personal consumption. If you're thinking to yourself, well, that's all fine and dandy, but what about the goddamn polar bears, man? Don't worry, there aren't any on the mainland. With a coastline of 83,281 kilometers, Norway has the second longest coastline in the world due to the combination of its rugged terrain and 50,000 islands. It has a history of fishing going back to the Stone Age, and in 1946 it was the first country to establish a Ministry of Fisheries. Today, the seafood industry has 6,200 registered vessels and employs 11,230 fishermen. It's the world's second largest exporter of seafood, accounting for 7.9% of all of Norway's exports in 2017. Norwegians eat just under 20 kilograms of fish and fish products per capita. Here's a breakdown of consumption by species. You wouldn't think something as ubiquitous as salmon sushi would have its origins in Norway, but it's true. In the 1970s, Norway began commercial salmon farming, but Norwegians had begun to change their dietary habits, increasing their intake of meat and poultry. By the 80s, surplus salmon was being stored in industrial freezers while, halfway across the world, Japan had overfished its waters to the point where it was only able to supply 50% of its domestic demand. Codenamed Project Japan, the Norwegian fishing industry came together to sell raw salmon exclusively for use in sushi, which would command a premium price. After several years of meetings and failed marketing exercises, they finally broke through in 1992. Fast forward to today, and it's Japan's most popular sushi topping, accounting for £140 million in trade between Norway and Japan in 2014. If you thought Bratwurg was remote, we're going to take a fjord cruise to a place even more remote, Urke, a village with a population of 53. No, that's not a typo. While we make our way there, let's talk a little about farming in Norway. Every aspect of Norway's history and culture is shaped by its unique geography. To understand why, take a look at the following table. Despite Norway's vast areas of wilderness, only 2.7%, or 10,400 square kilometers, of its land is suitable for agriculture, an area about the size of Cyprus. Of that area, only a third is suitable for crops. Most of the 40,000 farms in Norway are family-owned, small to medium-sized, with an average area of 0.25 square kilometers, or about 34 football pitches. Proper football, not American football. The growing season, defined as the number of days with an average temperature of at least 5 degrees Celsius, varies from between 90 days in the north to about 160 days in the south. These geographical quirks affect Norway in obvious and not so obvious ways. Historically, it's one of the reasons the Vikings left their shores for Britain, the availability of productive farmland. In 2011, it manifested itself in the Norwegian butter crisis, where heavy summer rainfall caused a milk production shortfall of 20 million litres, at the same time as increased demand due to high-fat diets. On top of this, Norway heavily taxed imported butter to protect Tine, its nationalised dairy company. This led to soaring butter prices, empty shelves, and enterprising individuals even being arrested for smuggling butter across the border. Food self-sufficiency is a measure of how well a country can feed itself, and Norway has one of the lowest values in the West at around 50%, meaning half of its food is imported. The scarcity of agricultural land is the reason that farming in Norway is heavily subsidised, to a tune of 60% of gross farming income. In 2019, the entire agricultural industry accounted for 1.3% of Norway's GDP, a value of £3.8 billion. We made it to Urke. In 2016, Urke had a population of 53, which consisted of 10 children, 31 adults and 12 seniors. 14 of them were active workers, and 20 people from outside Urke owned cabins in which they would regularly stay. In Urke, we can really see self-sufficiency in action. The locals run a fishery and also fish from the fjord. There's a communal market garden which has fresh vegetables and livestock graze on the valley grass. There's a hydroelectric plant for power and a community house for recreation. There are also several outdoor activities you could start from Urke: hiking, cycling, swimming, foraging and fishing boat trips. In a way, the lifestyle of the people here hasn't changed since farming was introduced to Norway. They still live off the land in a seasonal cycle, with the coast providing them with fish, domesticated animals producing milk, and the land providing grains and root vegetables. But what about winter? Before refrigeration, harsh conditions meant food had to be stored to last throughout the winter, but this wasn't possible without preserving them. It was these conditions that gave birth to some of Norway's most iconic dishes, such as
Gravlaks,
salmon, which is salted and traditionally fermented by burying it in sand,
rakfisk,
trout, which is salted and fermented for up to a year,
klippfisk,
cod, which is dried and salted in the open air,
sursild,
pickled herring. If you watched our Christmas in Norway episode, you'll recognize the next two dishes.
lutefisk,
Whitefish, which is salted and preserved in lye,
pinnekjøtt,
lamb ribs, which are dried, salted and smoked. Additionally, milk became processed into butter and cheese, and grains became
flatbrød,
flatbread and
knekkebrød,
crisp bread. Sometimes these cold conditions even worked in the farmer's favor. For instance, fish could be dried in the open air. But where was the food stored? These
stabbur,
or storage houses can still be found today, identifiable by their elevated stone columns. You might even notice one of them in Bratwurg. If you look closely, you'll notice that the top stone is wider than the others. This was a way to prevent rodents climbing up. And on that cheesy note, let's head back to Bratwurg during our last days there. We're at Pad Thai, having our last meal together before Biku moved to London to be with me. Our last meal in Bratwurg. Classic Pad Thai requires several elements: sweet, sour, salty, spicy. Rams, if you're watching, this is how you do it. Not that crap you made. A cold, dark day like this is the perfect food. It warms the soul.
Ooh.
It was time for me to head back to London. So this is it. The last time I'm going to see these mountains. However, West Norway had one last surprise for me. Just as the plane took off into a rain-drizzled sunset, I looked out the window to see a rainbow briefly form over the land, bathed in that warm glow I mentioned earlier in the documentary. And just like that, it was gone. In the next episode of the series, it's summer. We'll take a look at the traditions of National Day, the Festival of Midsummer, and the Norwegian summer break, where we go on our epic road trip across Norway, visiting Stavanger, Bergen, Geiranger, and Ålesund. If you enjoyed the episode, smash that like button with the force of 1,000 iron fists so you'll be notified when it comes out. And I'll see you in the next episode.